It is my opinion that jazz drumming became an art form with the advent of bebop. Prior eras of jazz placed the most emphasis on tonal instruments and relegated the drums to simply keeping time. When bebop developed in the 1940s, drums were finally given an equal part in the music. In other words, the music gave drummers the freedom and permission to follow the form of the song, interject accents, and solo like a player of a tonal instrument. Unfortunately, the history of jazz drumming is often told in terms of technical and equipmental innovations. For example, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica write that bebop drummer Kenny Clarke, quote, revolutionized the drummer's role in jazz by moving the principal timekeeping rhythm to the ride cymbal, end quote. However, this does not explain why this is important musically. This video in particular will focus on the musical innovations made by three historically prominent jazz drummers from the 1940s to the 1970s by displaying which drummers could have influenced them and which drummers they could have influenced. Note that I say, quote, could have, end quote, because I am drawing these connections based on noticeable musical qualities, and not necessarily from primary sources. For example, Max Roach cites Big Sid Catlett as an influence, but I do not hear as many musical similarities between him and Roach as I do Clarke and Roach. By focusing on why an innovation is important musically, I will fill a hole that is often overlooked when talking about jazz drumming. That being said, the three drummers on whom I am focusing are Max Roach, Elvin Jones, and Tony Williams. Max Roach rose in prominence in the mid to late 1940s. In my opinion, Roach's two most influential contributions were the perfecting of using the ride cymbal as a way to produce a smooth time feel and his musical soloing. Regarding the ride cymbal, Kenny Clarke is a possible influence on Roach. Listen to the open and airy feel Clarke achieves on an excerpt of Don Byas's 1941 song, Indiana. Now, listen to Roach's playing on the Clifford Brown and Max Roach song, Daoud. His ride cymbal is similarly airy, but also bright. This brings an energetic quality to the music. Roach takes a solo on the same song. While it may be difficult to hear, the solo is based on the form of the head. Notice how Roach uses different pitches melodically. If it was hard to hear how the head of the song and Roach's solo sound anything alike, that is all right. I have taken the liberty of layering both audio clips together so the similarities are easier to hear. Notice how accents, pitches, and cymbal scratches match up. Roach's influence on bebop drumming is incalculable. Essentially, every bebop drummer since has used the ride cymbal to keep a constant, flowing time feel, and melodic soloing is seen everywhere. To hammer this point home, I searched up Wikipedia's list of bebop drummers and went to a random number generator to pick a number n. I then went to the nth drummer in this list and searched them up on YouTube. The result is this video of drummer Phil Hay trading eights. Note his use of the ride cymbal to keep a legato time and his melodic ideas that he builds based off the other soloists. Roach's most famous melodic solo is probably a standalone piece called The Drum Also Waltzes. By playing a repeating motif in 3/4 waltz time with his feet, Roach establishes a melody that he can then solo over with his hands. This piece is so famous that many rock drummers incorporate variations of it into their solos. What follows is a video of Roach performing the piece live, a brief clip of legendary Led Zeppelin drummer John Bonham using it in his famous solo Moby Dick, and an extended clip of renowned Rush drummer Neil Peart soloing over a similar motif. In particular, listen to how both Roach and Peart build the intensity of the hand pattern over time to create counter melodies.
The only way, I guess, to illustrate or adequately define, I guess, Elvis' contribution to the drums would be to play a record of a pre-Elvin Jones drummer, play a record of Elvin Jones, and play a record of a post-Elvin Jones drummer. I think these three examples would best illustrate Elvin's contribution to the drums better than words could say.
Ron Carter said it all. Elvin Jones was probably the most influential drummer of the 1960s post-bebop era. In my opinion, the first musical contribution Jones brought to jazz drumming was broken time playing. According to drum educator John Riley, drummer Mel Lewis was one of the first jazz drummers to play in broken time. Broken time implies discontinuations in the standard bebop ride pattern that added choppiness to the time feel. Jones was likely listening to Lewis. The first of the following clips is Lewis playing broken time. The second clip shows how Jones expanded this concept to 4 limbs, creating opportunities for all limbs to generate sporadic accents and interesting musical textures. Lastly, the third video shows Jack DeJohnette, a drummer heavily influenced by this sound, using broken time in a jazz rock fusion context. The second musical innovation Jones brought to jazz drumming was the incorporation of African rhythms into the post-bebop sound. While African rhythms is an umbrella term for rhythms from a variety of African countries, and the use of such a broad term does a disservice in distinguishing their intricacies, the features that define different and specific African rhythms are beyond the scope of this video. Very broadly, African rhythms are heavily syncopated, polyrhythmic, and often not in the time signatures used by Western music. Jones is particularly known for interpreting 6/8 African rhythms onto the drum set. These particular rhythms create a dense and colorful wall of sound to which it is endlessly fascinating to listen. One of the first drummers to play 6/8 African rhythms on the drum set was Art Blakey, and based on sound alone, it is probable that Jones was heavily influenced by Blakey. Jones's playing on A Love Supreme Part 1, Acknowledgement, sounds eerily similar to, yet perhaps more developed than, Art Blakey's playing on the song Haina, recorded only 5 years earlier. African rhythms are less common than broken time in post-bebop drumming, but some drummers utilize it in circumstances. Again, Dejournette, likely heavily influenced by Jones, plays a 6/8 African rhythm on Michael Brecker's African Skies. The last drummer I am going to talk about is Tony Williams. Williams was all about the quarter note pulse. Rick Mattingly writes that Williams used, quote, a more pulse-oriented approach, which foreshadowed the use of straight-8 rock rhythms in jazz, end quote. The drummer that I think embodied quarter note pulse before Williams is Jimmy Cobb. Cobb's frequent use of quarter notes on the ride cymbal gives his music a relaxed feel. Strangely, this same pulse adds a sense of urgency to Williams's music, although this might be because Williams often played his quarter notes with the hi-hat pedal. Listen to Cobb's solid yet reserved playing on All of You with Miles Davis, and contrast it with Williams's playing with Davis on the song Agitation. Williams is also often thought as one of, if not the, first jazz rock fusion drummers. While it is hard to tell where Williams got his inspiration to incorporate rock rhythms into jazz, it is much easier to see his influence. For example, listen to Williams's fusion drummer contemporary, Billy Cobham, play on the 1970 song Devil Lady by the early fusion band Dreams. The drums are relatively simple and light and quite danceable. Next, listen to Williams's playing on the song To Whom It May Concern Us, which came out in the same year on his fusion album Turn It Over. The drumming is much more technically complex, heavy, swung, and undanceable. It exudes energy. Lastly, listen to Cobham's playing on the song Noonward Race with the Mahavishnu Orchestra 1 year later. Unlike his playing on Devil Lady, his drumming here is technically demanding, blazingly fast, somewhat swung, and breathtakingly powerful. To me, it is obvious that Cobham was influenced by Williams, even if Cobham weren't to cite Williams as a conscious influence. To conclude this video, I want to reiterate the fact that in the right hands, drums are just as musical and important as any other instrument in jazz. Even today, the thinking that jazz drummers are simply meant to keep time persists among casual jazz listeners. I also want to mention that no musician exists in a vacuum. Even though a jazz or rock drummer today may not sound like one of the drummers I focused on, there is near certainty that they were influenced by them, either consciously or unconsciously. While I had to leave out many historically important jazz drummers and their musical contributions for the sake of time, it is my hope that by listening to the bright and melodic drumming of Max Roach, the syncopated and rich musical tapestries woven by Elvin Jones, the thunderous excitement generated by Tony Williams, and the playing of others who likely influenced them or were likely influenced by them, a more complete and deeper appreciation of the history and musical role of drums in jazz can be realized.